Welcome everyone to this special Galien Foundation webinar celebrating the best of the very best in life sciences innovation over the past 50 years. I'm Jenna Foger, Senior Vice President on our Science and Technology team at Alexandria Venture Investments and Alexandria Real Estate Equities. On behalf of the Prix Galien Awards Committee, it is our absolute pleasure to congratulate all the nominees here and chair this last of 5 webinars presenting our 30 nominee products in preparation for a truly landmark event, the Prix Galien Golden Jubilee Awards on October 27th in New York City. There, we will announce the most innovative products brought forward by our industry over the past 50 years in 5 distinct categories: pharmaceuticals, biotechnology, orphan and rare diseases, vaccines, and medical devices and technologies. All told, the Jubilee event represents the most comprehensive assessment of private sector progress in combating disease taken in the last 50 years. Our focus today on this panel will be on the best pharmaceutical agents category, which has been the field of interest for each of our panelists as commercial leaders, researchers, and scientists engage in the development of technologies that bring forward new options for patients. The discussion today will shed light on the challenges of the journey from bench to bedside that each of our 5 nominated products have encountered in their own unique and ultimately successful way. So today I'm pleased to introduce the panelists and their nominated products: Dr. Renaud Capdeville, Global Program Head for Hematology for Novartis, representing Gleevec; Dr. Karen Langfeld, Global Medical Affairs Director for Infectious Diseases and Dermatology, General Medicines for GSK, representing Augmentin; and Professor Juan Alberto Marquez Rodriguez, Latin American Medical Director of Organon, representing COSAR and Zocard today. Unfortunately, Sanofi was unable to confirm a speaker for Plavix, but they are part of the nomination. We've allocated time for questions from viewers after our panel discussion, so please submit questions anytime during the webcast using the Q&A button just at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There will also be an audience poll conducted during the webinar, so we'll run for about 40 minutes or so, hear from our experts today, and then we'll turn to the poll followed by questions. But please do send in those questions anytime, and we'll hopefully get to them at the end. So without further ado, what we really want to focus on today, besides for these products in general and how they really got from bench to bedside, is what has pharmaceutical innovation accomplished over the past 50 years in making new drugs more clinically useful and accessible to patients for an increasing range of chronic and acute conditions. And I think, you know, the multitude and variety of nominated products speaks to that. Looking forward to the next few decades, what new technologies and delivery platforms will emerge for complex conditions in key hard to treat areas like cancer, cardiovascular disease, and vascular impairments. So if we may, let's move to our panel. And we've asked, you know, each company to prep quite a bit, but we'll also go a little ad hoc to keep things interesting. But maybe starting with you, Dr. Renaud Capdeville, tell us a little bit about yourself, and of course, a little bit about Gleevec, as everyone knows, but really how Gleevec got to where it is today.
Okay, so good morning, good evening, everyone. So I'm Renaud Capdeville, working in the Hematology Development Unit at Novartis. And I'm an hematologist by background, and I had the privilege to lead the clinical team that delivered the first approval of Gleevec in the early 2000s. Actually, Gleevec has been approved in the US in 2001. And that was a real landmark for oncology because that was the first targeted therapy introduced for the treatment of cancer and the first tyrosine kinase inhibitor. Before, the outcome of patients with chronic myeloid leukemia, which was the indication of Gleevec, was dismal: 3 to 4 years survival, and therapies available were toxic and not formidably effective. Gleevec dramatically changed that and dramatically increase the survival of this patient. And today, I have to say that a patient with chronic myeloid leukemia have more chance of dying of a car accident than CML. And the survival of this patient is almost equivalent to the general population. So today, there are several tyrosine kinase inhibitors available, but Gleevec really completely changed the framework on how we think about targeted therapy for cancer. And that's why it was called at that time the magic bullet.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Dr. Karen Langfeld, same question for you about Augmentin, maybe a little bit about yourself and then the journey to developing Augmentin.
Global Medical Affairs Director and I have the privilege to look after Augmentin, which is an antibiotic that I think everybody knows, and probably most people have been prescribed at one stage during their lifetime. And it's really an antibiotic that came out of Beecham Research Laboratories at the time. And the company had been working extensively in the infectious disease and antibiotic area because there's a massive unmet medical need in the area. We know that infectious disease conditions are responsible for a huge global burden of disease, and there's impact on everybody's life, and many of those potentially multiple times over the course of a lifetime. And infectious diseases disproportionately affect vulnerable populations. And sort of like in terms of this particular antibiotic, the antibiotic revolution we all know started with the discovery of penicillin in 1928, but because of the discovery shortly afterwards of penicillin resistance due to activity of bacterial beta-lactamase, which inactivates penicillin, really what we needed to do is look at the antibiotics we had at the time, and then identify compounds that could inhibit beta-lactamase and prevent penicillins from degradation. And the Augmentin program was, in fact, ahead of its time, because really the instance of beta-lactamase production amongst common respiratory pathogens, for example, started to pose a potential clinical problem in the 1970s. But our research on clavulanic acid, which was then combined with amoxicillin, started in the 1960s. And we were sort of able to launch Augmentin its first market on the 17th of September 1981. So we've actually just celebrated our 41st birthday for Augmentin. And really sort of like what this did was to sort of Augmentin not only addressed the emergence of beta-lactamase resistance, but this combination of amoxicillin with clavulanic acid extended the spectrum of pathogens against which amoxicillin is active.
Excellent, thank you. Professor Marquez, same for you. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and then a little bit more about the journey to approving COSAR and ZOCAR.
Hi, my name is Juan Marquez. I'm a cardiologist by training, and I have been in the pharmaceutical industry for more than 30 years and as a professor at the Central University of Venezuela for 25 years related with experimental cardiology. The first point that I need to address is why Organon is here. Organon became an independent, publicly traded company in June 2021 as a result of a spin-off from Merck and Company, that is also known as MSD outside the US, Canada, and Puerto Rico. And post-spin, Organon has taken ownership of Merck products from its women's health, trusted legacy brands, and biosimilar business. Organon is headquartered in Jersey City, New Jersey, USA. So that's why I have the honor to represent this couple of products. So related with, I will start with SOCOR. When Merck initiated the statin programs, there were really two major unmet needs, one related with ischemic heart disease, and that's the major cause of death in the developing country, but also the understanding of the cholesterol metabolism, and even more, the normal value of cholesterol. Cardiovascular disease mortality in the 1980s, when the program started, was around 507 deaths per 1,000 people. And even today, globally, it is estimated that 44 million people live with ischemic heart disease, and it's more prevalent, of course, in males than in females. With the statins and a lot of interventions, there is not only statins, the cause of the mortality reduction from ischemic heart disease, but it's interesting that from the 70s, there have been a reduction of 63% of mortality in men and 60% in women. The other point that is critical related with the development of the statin programs is the evaluation of what is the normal cholesterol value. And this has been a huge discussion among the clinical, because when you analyze population of Europe have high level of cholesterol, or in the US, but if you analyze native population in the Americas, for example, they have more or less 40% less level of cholesterol. So with the treatment with statin, we were able to analyze not only what is named the normal value that is population related, but what is the desired value of the cholesterol. And it was one of the major contribution of the statins in the cardiovascular area. Related with losartan, with COSAR, the product was launched in the 80s and was a product for basically 4 major diseases: hypertension, that's still being cause of more than 10 million deaths; stroke, that is the first cause of disability in the United States. Every 4 minutes, 1 person dies in the US related with stroke, and the hypertension is still the most prominent modifiable risk factor for ischemic stroke. The other is heart failure. That is important that the number of patients with heart failure almost doubled between 1990 and 2017. And it was declared as an emerging epidemic in 1997. And diabetes as a leading cause of kidney disease, about 1 of 3 adult patients with diabetes have kidney disease, and that represents around 140 million people with diabetic kidney disease. So the development of losartan was focused in 2 important clinical parts. One, related with the adherence of treatment. The people is able to take the pill on a simple 1 dose per day. And the second part is go beyond the blood pressure control and have impact in the consequence of hypertension in the organisms. And these are 3 of them: the stroke, heart failure, and diabetes.
Excellent, thank you. So maybe now turning back to Dr. Capdeville in terms of Gleevec, and as part of, so I co-lead the team at Alexandria, really our venture investment portfolio. And so we're always looking at obviously novel oncology platforms, new approaches to drug discovery, but Gleevec obviously did a lot of interesting, really groundbreaking things at the time. Can you talk a little bit about just, specifically going after CML? Was that indeed the initial indication that you were pursuing? And really kind of the pathway, for Gleevec to get approved in CML, and then obviously, having the tremendous success, but a little bit more insight, compared to what's going on today, where often, we're using new technologies, we're using new modalities, we're targeting cancer writ large, or solid tumors writ large, or hematological cancers writ large, but Gleevec seemed to have a much different approach. So give us a little bit of insight there.
Yes, sure. I think the story probably starts in the 80s. That's when the company preceding Novartis, Ciba, started a research program on tyrosine kinase inhibition. And this was a time that not many people believed that targeted therapy would be possible with tyrosine kinase inhibitors. There was high concern that the level of specificity needed for that would never be achievable. And so not many people were investing into that kind of research. And Novartis went on, or Ciba, to build this research group. And during the 90s, they identified the drug that became Gleevec, that was targeting half a dozen of interesting kinases that were implicated in some oncogenic processes. One of them was the Abelson kinase related to the BCR-Abelson fusion protein characteristics of chronic myeloid leukemia. Now, a challenge at that time was that CML was considered as a relatively small indication, difficult to target. However, because of the other targets of Gleevec, there was also a potential to develop the drug in other cancers, lung cancer, in prostate cancer, in glioblastoma, and a few others. However, there was a much deeper understanding of the kinase activation in CML. And this is why this is the disease that was picked up for the initial studies, just to demonstrate proof of concept and determine the safety profile and the right dose. So the first in-human study was done in CML, and it's only after a few patients entered into that study that we started really to see that something exceptional was happening. So that was already in the very first phase 1. And then after these first few observations, the development accelerated massively. And actually the development of Gleevec has been characterized by really the speed, because altogether it took only like 3 to 4 years from the first in-human, the beginning, the first patient entered in a phase 1 to the approval.
Fascinating. Thank you. So maybe Dr. Langfeld, turning to you, similar, but it may be a slightly different approach to the question. Antibiotics now in terms of new approvals or new things that have come out, Augmentin has really, maintained, I guess, its dominance and its, efficacy really on the scene. Whereas, it's been hard for, others to really follow and have the same impact. Can you talk a little bit about, what is it about Augmentin that you think was so successful, and maybe shed light a little bit on the challenges of, antibiotic drug development now, today as we kind of go forward, in 2022?
Yeah, I think sort of the reason that Augmentin continues to be sort of like relevant for the treatments of bacterial infections today, and continues to be sort of really recommended as a first choice treatment in all the major guidelines, particularly for community-acquired respiratory tract infections, such as community-acquired pneumonia and acute cystitis media, and is listed as an access antibiotic by the WHO AWARE classification, is because really we've continued to sort of innovate the product since the first launch of the product in 1981. So when Augmentin was first launched, the ratio of amoxicillin to clavulanic acid was a 2-to-1 ratio. And that was effective against the pathogens at the time. But as we know, sort of one of the sort of biggest emerging threats in public health today is antimicrobial resistance. And sort of what has happened over the years with Augmentin is that, GSK has continued to innovate this product, really sort of like to sort of maximize clinical benefit for the patients and trying to minimize that emergence and spread of antimicrobial resistance. And so there are sort of like available adult and pediatric dose forms of Augmentin with increasing ratios of amoxicillin to clavulanic acid from 2-to-1 to 4-to-1, 8-to-1 and to 14-to-1. And these were developed really to achieve, bacterial eradication and sort of like provide improved efficacy where there's increasing resistance. Because we know that suboptimal antibiotic dosing, including from antibiotic misuse, which is quite common, is one of the factors in increasing antimicrobial resistance. And I think, to your point, I think it's, it's very much a case that sort of like we need in the antibiotic space and the anti-infectious diseases space to sort of like to really sort of work as pharmaceutical companies, but also work with governments and other stakeholders by developing new medicines, as well as continue to innovate. We need to look at those new options. And so sort of like GSK does have a number of projects targeting priority pathogens deemed critical and urgent by the WHO and the CDC, including a new first-in-class antibiotic. And sort of really sort of infectious disease, because of its huge sort of like burden, is a good place and as an essential place for us to continue to develop new options and new treatments.
Yeah, absolutely. So Professor Marquez, I mean, similar for you, hypertension, also an area where, COSAR came out, made a huge splash. There's been a little bit of movement in the field, but I mean, COSAR, and again, this is why, you're all being nominated today, but these are amazing drugs that have solved, real chronic conditions for which there's been limited innovation to follow. So maybe, talk a little bit about, both COSAR and Zocor from that perspective, really what kept them kind of ahead, ahead of the game, and continuing to benefit, patients for decades with little innovation or competition, for that matter, until more recently.
Yeah, but probably I will start with the history of the development, because it's very interesting that it's a product that was not full developed by Merck. Mm-hmm. Merck entered at the end of the process. The process started in the late 1970s when the launch and the study of the angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors confirmed that angiotensin 2 plays an important role in regulating blood pressure. But it was the research at Takeda that discovered in 1982 a couple of angiotensin 2 antagonists that have moderate potency, short duration of action, and limited oral bioavailability. And then the DuPont scientifics, using nuclear magnetic resonance, studies the special structure of angiotensin II, and they understand that they need to enlarge the molecule from Takeda in order to obtain a new product. And then DuPont and Merck scientists work together in order to substitute the terminal groups of the original molecule. And that's finally how they obtain a good product with good oral activity, better availability, and duration of action that was named losartan. The point related with the clinical impact of this product when they arrive is, instead of the classic evaluation of the product that in the case of hypertension was the product again placebo, when losartan arrives, the company needs to evaluate the efficacy of the product again, another antihypertensive product already in the market that was decided by the authority, that was atenolol. So the clinical studies, and it was a turn point when you decide to compare with an active principle instead of placebo, but was a major challenge because you really needs to be good in the clinical results in order to achieve the proper results for the patient. And that is how the LIFE study was created. And the LIFE study was created in order to evaluate high-risk patient with left ventricular hypertrophy comparing losartan with atenolol. And the original reduction was not only in myocardial infarction and stroke, but also in the regression of left ventricular hypertrophy, reduction of new onset of atrial fibrillation, and even the reduction of 25% in the new onset diabetes. One critical point is that if we take the results of the LIFE study and put it on the European Union population, that is the population similar in age between 55 and 80 years, that was included in the LIFE study was around 7.8 million individuals. Losartan could prevent around 125,000 first strokes in the next 5.5 years. So that's an amazing result, and one of the reasons why the product is so successful in the next year.
Excellent. So if we, and thank you for that insight, if we pull back the curtain a little bit, and it's always interesting to have these conversations with people who lived and breathed this, but if we pull back the curtain a little bit, I'd love to hear from each of you, any challenges or real hurdles along the way from transitioning, the product or the clinical candidate from early proof of concept to then clinical development and ultimately, to commercialization and available to patients. Any kind of interesting stories or lessons learned, that you'd want to share with the audience, because we don't usually get this kind of inside scoop, if you will, but anyone can take the question first.
Maybe I can start because
Sure.
the history of simvastatin is very interesting. The initial cholesterol biosynthesis, that is a very complex process that involved more than 30 enzymes, start in the 1950s and 1960s. Simvastatin was launched almost 40 years later. So it's the first lesson is that the process takes time. The second one, once you decide the target, that in this case was the HMG-CoA reductase, that was the target, even though it was not clear how it works. And it was until the Nobel Prize Brown and Goldstein described in 1974 the LDL receptors and the importance of these on the control of cholesterol, that we really understand the potential effects on the block of this enzyme. Then a critical actor was a Japanese biochemist, Kiro Endo, that was motivated by the Fleming studies of fungus, and working with Sankyo research laboratories, he isolated a factor from a fungus, a penicillin citrinum, analyzing more than 6,000 fungal extracts that, by the way, these fungal esters were provided by the Japanese beer industry, where they used to work previously. So he finally found an inhibitor that was named compactin. And in 1976, Dr. Vagelos sent a letter to Sankyo asking for some samples of the product and some data from the results that they have. And Sankyo will accept to share the results with Dr. Vagelos at Merck. So that's how start the statin story. In 1978, Alfred Albers discovered basically another inhibitor from another fungus that was the Aspergillus that was named lovastatin. Lovastatin was the natural product, but then the scientific Merck synthesized another analog of lovastatin that was the simvastatin molecule. That the major issue is that it's 2.5-fold better activity in inhibiting the HMG-CoA reductase. But even the product, the lovastatin product was available in the 80s, the product was stopped just because there were some rumors related with Compatic and the safety profile in dogs. At the same time, you have some rumors related with safety, but the physicians that were involved in the early phase of lovastatin say that this product is amazing lowering the cholesterol. So Merck, talking with the FDA, was persuaded to restart the lovastatin clinical trials in 1984, and that's results was the ones that give the FDA the reasons to approve lovastatin in 1987. Wow. So it's an interesting story where you have multiple actors, you have collaboration between companies that is also interesting. At the same time, you have the academic with Dr. Brown and Goldstein that received the Nobel Prize some years later. And that's how simvastatin was finally produced.
Very interesting. Thank you. So for Gleevec, Dr. Capdeville, any lessons learned or core challenges that you'd like to bring to light?
Yeah, actually, I was very interested by what Professor Marcus said, because I contributed to a very interesting article published a few years ago by Jonathan Proctor and Mark Fishman from Harvard University that looked at when innovation started leading to one of the key drugs available today in medicine. And they came to the conclusion that there is often a kind of a very long lifetime, about 40 years, between the first fundamental discovery and the availability of a drug. Of course, there are many steps in between, but that's something to keep in mind. Now, in the case of Gleevec, I think initially there was a lot of uncertainty on what could be the potential of these tyrosine kinase inhibitors, concern about safety. Would that work? Would that be acceptable? And for all these reasons, the plan had initially only one phase 1 study in CML. Again, that was to establish proof of the concept. But as I said, the study started in 1998. And the first results were presented at the big Congress of Hematology in December 1999. And then the news literally exploded in the media. And from that time, we started to be bombarded by requests from all over the world to get access to the drug, to have a slot on the clinical study. And then that became a huge challenge. How can you accelerate a program like that when you are only in phase 1? You don't have a lot of information. You even don't know what is the right dose. So that was the biggest challenge. And I think what was important in these days is came actually from two key people in Novartis. There was a very strong head of research in oncology, Alex Matter, who was really at the source of this research program on tyrosine kinase inhibitors. And also the CEO of Novartis at the time, Daniel Vazela, had a kind of personal story with somebody in his family who had been affected by leukemia. And he surprised the whole company when he said, guys, for the next year, this program will be the first priority for the company. Because people thought, I mean, there is no, we don't know what is the potential. But then, I mean, that was the only way to cope with the pressure and to put together an infrastructure to address all these requests coming from all the world.
Wow, that is very interesting. Did not know that. Wow. Dr. Langfeld, same for you. Tell us a little bit, kind of behind the scenes on Augmentin, challenges, lessons learned, et cetera?
Yeah, I think the augmented development was challenging, not in the proof of concept and achieving the hypothesis that combining sort of a beta-lactam antibiotic with a beta-lactamase inhibitor would actually lead to the overcoming the beta-lactamase and sort of leave the antibiotic free to kill the bacteria. It was, around the discovery of this great beta-lactamase inhibitor, clavulanic acid, and actually taking that raw material, that raw drug, and turning that into a medicinal product, because this was a huge challenge for us because of the moisture sensitivity of clavulanic acid. So the original form that we looked at in the research rapidly acquired moisture, both from the environment, but also from the preferred partner antibiotic, amoxicillin. And so we had to do a lot of work, investigated alternative forms, and we finally found a less hygroscopic salt, which was, chosen for development. But even then, there was a great amount of work that needed to be done around our manufacturing facilities, the technology, and the process that needed to be developed to master combining clavulanic acid and amoxicillin. And that was not only for product formulation and development, but also for the actual final manufacture of the product. And even today, we still have continuous process improvements in the clavulanic acid technology to ensure that we have a quality product. And I think so. The learning for me there is that we have to think about the manufacture as well as the actual development of the product, and at a very early stage. So,
yeah, interesting. So I guess one other kind of line of questioning, and then I want to get back to innovation, kind of challenges and opportunities. But obviously there's new policy, new drug pricing legislation that passed, in the states that, now your pharmaceutical agents are probably immune to, the new legislation, just given that they've been on the market for some time. But, had your products been approved at the time of the legislation, they probably would have come under scrutiny and potential negotiation with an impact to revenues. I don't want to get into a whole policy conversation, but just any perspective on kind of the impact of this legislation on drug discovery, development, innovation, et cetera. And we can kind of keep this part brief, but I'd be remiss if we didn't touch on it, because I think it is quite relevant. And that question's for anyone. Crickets. Uh-oh. Just a sentence or two.
We are researchers. We are not the guy from Access. So
yeah, but is this something you're thinking about in terms of drug development now, as you think towards kind of the next generation of drug discovery, innovation, development, or it hasn't really impacted kind of the way that you're thinking about things?
Yeah, I would say that's certainly something, an element that has to be taken into account when our commercial colleagues are putting together some forecast on what could be the revenue out of a particular compound in the future. But something similar happened in Europe 20-30 years ago. So it's just another new element, but in itself, I don't see that as being impacting the discussion that we have on how to prioritize this or that particular research program. Do we want to work with that target or in that disease area? Because one part is about the science and the capabilities of the company, where we believe we can make a real difference with a transformative medicine. And then you discuss, okay, how that could look like in the future if the drug is approved. And then comes into play the implication of this new legislation, but that's a separate topic.
No, and I think that the COVID crisis showed the importance to have a healthy research structure in the pharmaceutical industry. Mm-hmm. If we didn't have the proper research organization in the industry, probably the COVID crisis will last many years from now. So the academic, of course, is important. The academic have some structure and some capability, and we as a private industry have another capability. So as Dr. Capdeville said, I think that at the end is the balance, but we need to maintain the research as a critical part of the human well-being, and that's important.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you. So maybe moving on, to other relevancies in terms of challenges. I mean, the three of you really represent obviously industry veterans and experts. Has drug discovery and development, in particular clinical development, do you feel like it's gotten more challenging, different? Really, how has it evolved, over the past couple of decades as it relates to you and your organization? So in terms of, bringing new drugs to market now, it's a different landscape in a lot of ways, in 2022 than it was when a lot of these drugs were initially approved. So maybe give a little bit of insight, kind of into the day-to-day and the process really of getting, new medicines approved and kind of working within the industry now. Harder, easier, different, shed some light there.
Much harder, much harder. But sure. No, the example is related with the last 50 years. As I said, for example, if you analyze the antidepressant drugs in the 1970s, we have only 3 drugs. Now we have 11 therapeutic groups of antihypertensive in the market. So when you plan to do any type of research, you need to compare with not with placebo, but with the gold standard therapy. So the possibility to have a significant result needs to be very well planned, and is not the classic one between placebo and active drug. So it's more complex. The regulations at the country levels are also important. The other point that is relevant is that we need to take care of the gender bias that we didn't take care in the past, and now we need to take care of the gender and the different groups that needs to be included in any type of clinical trial. So the representative is important also to take care. So not getting easy. I think that getting rough.
Dr. Langfeld, do you have a perspective on this?
Yeah, I think I totally agree there that we really have to. It has got more difficult, but I think that's right in a way, because we really need to understand the effect of our drug in all the populations and all the people in which it's going to be used. And so I think now there's sort of like, there's what I would describe as an elongated development. So you not only have the clinical trials you have to go through in order to get the product approved, but we have to make sure that we continue after launch, that we really look at the real world effect in all the different populations, and really sort of like make sure that we can enable access all around the world in the developing countries, especially for something for us for infectious diseases. There's a huge need in the low income and low to middle income countries, as well as in the developed world. So we need to make sure that we also are aware of that need, and we can meet those needs.
Absolutely. And Dr. Capdeville, what do you think? I mean, in oncology, so much innovation, so much progress, but yet so much going on. So maybe some insight there. Has it gotten harder or easier, or yes?
Yeah, but I think it's a fact that now the pace of research and discoveries is amazing. And today, when you go to big oncology congresses, I mean, every year you have important trials delivering really important results. That was definitely not the case 20 years ago, where it was very depressing to go to oncology conferences. So the pace of innovation has accelerated tremendously. However, I think that there's still too much waste in the system. One example that attracted the attention of many people is the field of immuno-oncology, a huge success for many cancers, with the approval of immune checkpoint inhibitors in the recent years that transform really the way we think about certain cancers. But today, the numbers of trials being done with various immune modulators, immune checkpoint inhibitors is daunting. So is this efficient? I believe it's also reflected to the difficulty to fully understand the biology and how to select the right compound for the right patient. Now, in parallel to that, another innovation comes from a much better understanding on the biology of cancer that allows to think more efficiently about personalized medicine. It is something that is definitely relevant to certain tumors, unfortunately not too many, but this is really coming into play. Take example, lung cancer. Now, if you have certain mutation, you will receive some targeted therapies or some treatment. If you have other mutation, you will receive a different treatment, and so on. So that is a good thing, because that's it's become a lot more efficient than what we used 30 years ago with chemotherapy for everybody. So innovation comes rapidly, but also the recent innovation comes with increased complexity. The most recent example is provided by the cellular therapies, the CAR-T therapies, genetically engineered cellular therapies. I mean, these products are just amazing. I mean, what they can achieve, but they are extraordinarily complex to produce, to personalize. Of course, we are learning, and many people are working on that. So I'm sure that in the near future, we'll see big improvement. That's more complex.
Yeah.
Yeah, and another point that is also important related with the cardiovascular disease in general are the new technologies for monitoring the patient at home, and how can we manage that, and how these could be used, and the big data, and we can have data for millions of people, and it's relevant. How can we manage? So we have at the same time the personalized treatment that Dr. Capdeville have said, and at the other part, we have the big data and the real world data that we need to analyze in order to give the better treatment to the patient. So we are working in both stream of the spectrum. That was not the common way to do it in the 50 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to,
and if I could add,
yeah,
Jenna, another comment here, because what we've observed in the last 30 years is that the cost of development have increased tremendously. And the cost of clinical studies in particular is now extremely high. And this is a problem. And there are many reasons for that. But having this in mind, it was very interesting to see what happened during the COVID pandemic, because here researchers had to put together trials to test all kinds of therapies for COVID in only a few weeks, and then we had the many trials, like trials done by the WHO or other international organization, who delivered super important results, but in a record time, and with very simple structure for data collection. And during the same time, many companies started to rethink how to approach the problem of decentralized clinical studies using remote monitoring of patients, something that was difficult to imagine before, but there was no choice during COVID. So that's something that developed rapidly. And we start to see that perhaps in the future, this digital monitoring, remote data entry, even patients self-reporting could really address one aspect of the problem of the cost of clinical studies.
Yes, very important. Yeah, no, thank you for mentioning that. Absolutely. So before I have a few more questions of the panelists, but please, if you do as well, write them in. Just click on the Q&A box. We make sure to get to your questions, but we'll actually take a brief pause so that we can actually poll the audience. Now that we've learned about the innovations, to just kind of quick poll, which of the following products do you feel should receive the Prix Galien Golden Jubilee Award? Clearly, each one, extremely meritorious on its own. But if we could launch the poll, then we'll go through a few more questions, get to your questions, and we'll preview the results at the end. So again, in the category of best pharmaceutical agent, which should win the Prix Galien Golden Jubilee Award? Augmentin, Cozar, Gleevec, Plavix, or Zocor? And we'll leave it open for a little under a minute. Okay, so as you guys are putting in your requests, we'll get to it in the end. So back to our questions. Maybe we'll take one that kind of came in, and then we'll get into the plan questions. But from Tilahun Yilma asked, why are drugs developed in the US? Why are drugs developed in the US cheaper abroad than they are, obviously in the US? Maybe shedding some light on that.
Yeah, I think as we discussed earlier, I think I'm a researcher or clinician, so I cannot really comment on that. But I mean, this is something reflecting the different healthcare structure in different countries, different policies. Now, also, a fact is that now drug development is clearly globalized. And the majority of large phase 3 studies are done at the global level with an attempt to involve as many countries as possible. And this is becoming an important topic because these large trials have to reflect the diversity of the population likely to be treated with the drug in the future. And so that's something that is discussed a lot at the moment.
Thank you. Yep. I think that's right. I mean, a lot of it obviously is driven by, the policy and the structure and who's paying for it, government, private payers, public payers, et cetera. Mm-hmm. Okay, so from Manny Subramanian, thank you for your question. He asked, what is the role of artificial intelligence, in your organization, and what role will it play in future drug development?
I will ask from the clinical point of view, artificial intelligence have two critical roles. One, detect the needs. So again, we can analyze big data with artificial intelligence on a faster way, so we can identify some specific needs that the patient have. The other one is, of course, related with the analysis of the literature, the different molecules and how it works, and how can we plan a general idea of a molecule, but it's more related with basic research. I think that from the clinical point of view, again, the artificial intelligence will play a critical role, understanding the need of the patient and the data on the real world. That is probably the most important part for the future for chronic diseases. That is not only the short term, because at the end, when you approve a product, you have a study with 3 years, 4 years of follow-up, and at the end, the patient will take the product for 50 years, 60 years. So this type of chronicity, we need to understand it better and have big data related with that, and that will bring us an incredible amount of information. And as I said before, the other point is try that all the people are analyzed on the same way. And the different groups are analyzed on the same way, the different ages. So that will bring at the end, not a personalized, probably not in the level of the chronic diseases, but it will bring us a better treatment for each patient at the end.
Thank you. Yeah, we got another question from John Birch about that in terms of the potential for real world data collected routinely, both the impact of real world data on the clinical development side, but then also on the patient care side. So, absolutely. Yeah, so maybe, Dr. Langfeld, do you have an additional perspective on that in terms of how, GSK is thinking about that, whether in, your therapeutic area or otherwise, just in terms of how the organization is really taking that to, into effect in a new way?
Yeah, I think sort of like in our area, it's, not only the sort of like the treatments themselves, but also the big data is so useful for understanding the environment. So if we're pulling together to understand, for example, the progress of antimicrobial resistance, to look at sort of surveillance data from around the world in different countries, in different populations, what the relevance that is, and also sort of like really to understand how treatments are being used. Are they being used appropriately? And therefore, what is the outcome on the patients, but also on public health?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the perspective from the antibiotic and the AMR point of view.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. And certainly there's opportunities for the interplay between AI, artificial intelligence, and real world data, and the whole system coming together. So hopefully at some point it will get easier again, not harder, but yeah, still a ways away. So in terms of, I really think the last line of questioning, just for each of you, if there's no more questions from the audience, is really thinking about, innovation in your specific area. So obviously Gleevec, Augmentin, Zocor, Cozar have really broke the mold and, have been first in class and or best in class, or both. But thinking about innovation, maybe we'll start with you, Dr. Capdeville, and kind of go through the line. But what is most exciting to you in terms of innovation in oncology, CML, hematological malignancies in general, and what's kind of coming down the pike that we can look forward to?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think at the moment what is very exciting is that there have been, we've witnessed formidable technological and scientific advances in the last 20 years. And now it's fascinating to see chemists able, for example, to design antibodies in multiple different ways, antibody-drug conjugates in a very smart way. Then you have truncated antibodies, you have different payload, different linkers. Sounds easy, but the possibilities are huge. Same thing with cellular therapies. This is opening a completely new area for true personalized medicine. And now we are seeing the reality of even gene therapy coming in, or gene editing therapies. Of course, today they are very complex, they are very expensive, a lot of uncertainty, but I'm sure that in the future, these things will be addressed and they will become more broadly applicable. But the possibilities are enormous. But also, so that's very exciting. At the same time, we should not move too fast because there is still a lot of uncertainty, and safety is the most important aspect with these very novel therapies. So it will always be very important to have a good control on safety early on.
Important reminder. And Dr. Langfeld, for you, in terms of Augmentin, in terms of antibiotic development, in terms of resistance problem, what's kind of coming down the pike? What are you most excited about?
No, I think so what's really important, and where I really see sort of the future is thinking about, we've been focused very much with Augmentin on treatment. But I think one of the most important things that we need to look forward to is thinking about those connections between treatment and prevention of disease. And I think in the infectious diseases area, that interaction between vaccines and treatment and antibacterials, antivirals, for example, is really something that we need to understand and maximize and really focus on. So that's where I think that we need to think about the future in terms of prevention.
Yes, for sure. And Professor Marquez, to you, comment on the therapeutic areas and also on chronic cardiovascular disease in general, kind of what's coming down the pike.
I think that the most important thing is that we need to improve the healthy life expectancy. That is not only the life expectancy, but we need to live longer, but live better. That is one of the critical things that we need to evaluate and plan. The second part, as Dr. Capdeville said, we have a lot of new antibodies, tissue treatment, cellular treatment, these type of things that are promised therapies, probably not applicable to all the patients. And at the same time, we need to go back to basics and think that a chronic disease is a patient that needs treatment every day and is not put one pill above the other and above the other, so they take at the end 10 or 12 pills at the same day. So we need to analyze how can we create a way to make the life easier for this patient. Can the patient take only one pill instead of 5 pills? It will be better or not. The adherence will improve, and that's a basic point that sometimes we forgot when we have all this new technology. But adherence to treatment in chronic disease is still the critical goal for all the research. So putting together the innovations and how can we apply this innovation to specific patients, and at the same time increase the healthy life expectancy are the two major points for the chronic diseases.
Yeah, wonderful. No, and great point about that in terms of just the volume of medication. So in closing, we'll wrap with this, but if you could each give just your final kind of closing remarks. I mean, I think the pharmaceutical industry is absolutely mission driven, and the industry at large gets so much flack for different things, but thank you to each of you for all of the work that you do and all of the innovation that you've really, spent your careers driving forward. It makes a huge, huge difference, obviously, for the lives of hundreds of thousands of patients around the world. So maybe just closing thoughts, just in terms of, the work that you do, advancing, new pharmaceuticals, into the future. What do you want this audience to be left with? And maybe Dr. Langfeld, we'll start with you.
I think the thing is thinking about sort of like, how do we achieve the best for our patients? And for public health. And I think the important thing is that, not to have just the pharmaceutical industry view. We all need to work together. We're only going to succeed if we move ahead together. So sort of pharmaceutical industry, researchers, governments, sort of private funding, all of these. And I think that's where we need to sort of aim for the future.
Yep.
Professor Marquez.
No, I think that's one of the learnings of the story that I tell. Even for COSAR or for simvastatin, it was a relation between the academy, the different companies, scientific for one company's work with other companies. And that probably was not a common practice in the last 20 years. And we tried to do everything more isolate than working together. And again, I think that the COVID crisis put some things in place again. And that's one of the things that probably will help us to understand the need to intensify the networking and the collaboration, not only with the academy, but also between the different companies, and that we can work together and obtain better results in a short term. That is probably the most critical part, as Dr. Langfeld said, at the end is for the benefit of the patient. That is the most important part of any pharmaceutical company.
Thank you. And Dr. Capdeville, to end with you.
Yeah, I mean, everything has been said, so what I should add, but perhaps I would say that it's also now becoming very important, finally, to integrate the view of patients in drug development decisions. And now we have much better instruments to do that with digital devices and their experience with a particular drug. Clinical researchers really are challenged here because how to integrate this view in their own analysis of patients' outcome. I'm sure that this aspect will have a greater influence on drug development in the future, and many companies are working heavily on that. But that's a very exciting area. So to hear the patient voice and to hear that very early on.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to each of you for sharing your innovation stories, your insights, and really above all else for all the work that you do. So this webcast will be viewable at www.galienfoundation.org. We'll post the poll results. It's not the final win by any means, but at least an indication. Good luck to all of our nominees. Good luck. And we look forward to seeing you, the audience, in person on October 27th for the Golden Jubilee Awards Gala at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. Thank you very much.